John Ulzheimer is known as one of our nation's most recognized credit experts. Having worked for 28 years in the credit industry, John has become one of the most prolific speakers about credit and the go-to authority on answers to credit-related questions. Credit Countdown with John Ulzheimer.
Hey there, this is John Ulzheimer. I hope everyone is having a good day. Today we're going to talk about an industry term, thin file. What is a thin file? Why do you care? And if you have one, what can you do about it? What is the problem with having a thin file? We're going to talk all about thin files today. So when I talk about file, I just want to make sure that I'm clear that I'm referring to a credit report. Some people refer to them as credit files. We'll get into a discussion of the proper terminology for these types of things another time. But when I refer to thin file in the context of today's video, I'm referring to a credit report. So thin has the same meaning for credit reporting as it has in human beings. So if someone's thin, then they're light. There's not a whole lot of that person. There's just less of them. So for credit reports, if you have a thin credit file or thin credit report, it means that you have a very limited amount of information on that report. And when I say information, I mean things like account information. So generally speaking, thin files are going to be credit reports that have 3 trade lines or less. So 1 trade line, 2 trade line, and 3 trade line credit reports are commonly referred to as thin files. A trade line is it represents some sort of an account or a relationship that you have with a lender, for example. So if you have an American Express credit card, a Chase mortgage, and a Wells Fargo auto loan, and all that stuff is on your credit report, then you have 3 trade lines, and you have a thin file. Normally, younger people, and this isn't universal, of course, there's always exceptions to any rule, but normally thin files are people who are younger, and so they just haven't had years and years of time to have all these relationships with lenders, and therefore their credit reports are just as a matter of their age are going to be thinner. The problem with thin credit, there's actually 2 problems with thin credit reports. Number 1 is your credit report may eventually cease to exist, meaning that if you're not a very credit active person and you have a limited number of trade lines on your credit report and you eventually pay them off or close them and you don't open new accounts, eventually those trade lines are going to be purged by the credit bureaus. If they're in a derogatory status, they have to be purged as a matter of law. If they're in good standing, then the credit reporting agencies all have policies whereby they will remove inactive accounts after 10 years. And so eventually you're not going to have a credit report, which is a completely different problem. That's not even a thin file. That's called a credit invisible. The second problem with thin files is with credit scoring. There's a possibility that if you have a limited amount of information on your credit report, that you're not going to qualify for a FICO credit score. In order to qualify for a FICO score, you have to have a minimum amount of information on a credit report in order to qualify your credit report for a FICO score. A credit report doesn't automatically get a FICO score. It has to essentially meet certain minimum standards. And if you only have 3 or fewer trade lines, there's a possibility, especially if those trade lines are what's called stale, meaning they haven't been updated in a while, it's very, very likely that you're going to fail the minimum scoring criteria and you're not going to have a score. And why does this matter? Why do you care? Well, it matters because eventually every single one of you who's watching this is going to want a car loan or maybe going to want a house. And you're going to have some sort of a credit history to fall back on and prove to a lender, hey, look, I manage my obligations appropriately. Please give me a mortgage, or please give me an auto loan, and please give me one with really good terms. And without a credit report, or with an otherwise thin credit report, you're not going to really be able to make that argument as compelling as you would be able to make it if you had a more voluminous credit report with years and years of information that a lender can kind of latch onto and use as part of their risk assessment processes. I know there's something kind of romantic about this notion of living off the credit grid, but I can tell you that it's very, very problematic, and eventually throughout the arc of your credit life cycle, which is usually a bit between 50 and 60 years for most consumers, you're going to want to borrow money to buy a house. Unless you're independently wealthy, you're not going to be able to pay cash for a house. It's less likely you're going to be able to pay cash for a car. You may not even want to pay cash for a car because you may do better leaving your money in an interest accruing account versus paying interest on an auto loan. So you want to have options, and living off the credit grid gives you very little as far as options go. So if you have any questions about thin credit files, then please drop them in the comment section below. I appreciate you watching. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk again soon.
For more videos and credit tips from John Ulzheimer, go to www.tradelinesupply.com.